Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a child born with nothing. No family name, no protection, no voice in a world that does not care if he lives or dies. Now picture that same child standing up against hunger, cruelty, and injustice, holding on to nothing but innocence and hope. That child is Oliver Twist. His story is not just about the streets of Victorian England. It is about every struggle between weakness and strength, despair and resilience, evil and goodness. And the lesson it carries is one that still speaks to us today. Because the measure of who we are is found in how we treat those who cannot fight for themselves. When we think of Oliver Twist, the first image that often comes to mind is that of a small, fragile boy standing in front of authority, asking for more food with trembling hands and eyes filled with quiet desperation. This moment captures more than just hunger. It represents innocence placed in a world where cruelty seems to dominate every corner. Oliver's journey is a constant clash between his pure heart and the corrupt, violent society around him. He is not a hero with strength or cleverness, but a symbol of untainted goodness that resists being shaped by darkness. His struggles reveal how innocence, in its purest form, becomes both vulnerable and powerful in a world built on exploitation. From the very beginning, Oliver is born into suffering. His mother dies shortly after his birth, and he is immediately thrust into a cold and unforgiving workhouse system. The institutions that were supposed to protect the poor instead strip them of dignity. Innocence in Oliver's life is never nurtured by society. Rather, it is tested and pushed to its limits. When he dares to ask for more food, he is punished, not because he did wrong, but because his innocence challenges a system designed to crush human spirit. Dickens portrays this not only as a child's personal struggle, but as a mirror of the cruelty embedded within social structures. Oliver's purity becomes a spotlight on society's inhumanity. Throughout his childhood, Oliver encounters people who seek to corrupt him, using his weakness for their own gain. When he is taken in by Fagin, the leader of a gang of child thieves, Oliver is surrounded by criminality, trickery, and moral decay. Here, the fragility of innocence is tested most strongly. Fagin and his companions hope to train Oliver into a life of crime, to reshape him into yet another victim of society's neglect. Yet, what makes Oliver unique is his refusal to accept corruption, even when survival seems to demand it. Despite hunger, fear, and isolation, he does not willingly surrender to the temptations of theft or dishonesty. His innocence becomes an act of resistance, a quiet rebellion against the forces that seek to consume him. This struggle is not without pain. Oliver's innocence makes him suffer more, because he cannot adapt easily to the cruelty around him. Unlike the other children who learn to numb themselves and accept crime as a way of life, Oliver remains emotionally vulnerable. He feels the injustice deeply. He cries when others would grow hardened, and he clings to the small sparks of kindness he receives. His emotional openness makes him a target of abuse, but it also becomes the reason why good people are drawn to him. Characters like Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Maylie recognize his purity and offer him compassion. Innocence, then, while a source of suffering, also becomes a magnet for redemption. Oliver's struggles show that innocence is never passive. It constantly resists the forces that try to erase it. Dickens seems to suggest that the survival of innocence is possible even in the darkest settings, but it requires strength, endurance, and faith in human goodness. Oliver does not fight with violence or cunning. Instead, he survives with gentleness, honesty, and a refusal to let his soul be corrupted. His innocence becomes a quiet strength, showing that goodness can outlast cruelty, even if it suffers greatly along the way. At a deeper level, Oliver's story is a reflection of childhood itself, caught in the tension between vulnerability and resilience. Every child is born innocent, but society shapes and often distorts this innocence. Dickens uses Oliver as a universal figure, showing us how systems of poverty, neglect, and injustice rob children of their natural purity. By watching Oliver struggle, we are reminded of the children who face similar battles in every generation. Children who must hold on to innocence in environments that seem designed to destroy it. Oliver's story is not just about one boy. It is about the universal conflict between the fragile beauty of innocence and the harsh reality of a world that preys on weakness. The struggles of Oliver Twist remind us that innocence is not simply a stage of life that disappears with age. It is a moral quality, a way of seeing the world with honesty, openness, and hope. The fact that Oliver clings to this quality despite everything he endures makes his journey powerful. He embodies the idea that innocence, though vulnerable, can survive corruption and cruelty. His suffering reveals how rare and precious it is, and his survival shows how much strength lies within it. In Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens paints a powerful and often unsettling picture of poverty and the cruelty of social injustice. The novel is more than a story of one boy. It is a lens through which the failures of Victorian England's institutions are revealed. Poverty is not presented as a temporary hardship, but as a trap, one that crushes the body and spirit of those born into it. Through Oliver's experiences, Dickens exposes the brutality of the workhouse system, the exploitation of the poor, and the indifference of the wealthy toward the suffering that existed right beside them. Poverty in this story is not only an absence of material wealth, but also the denial of dignity, humanity, and fairness. Oliver's life begins in a setting that immediately highlights society's neglect of the poor. Born in a workhouse to a dying mother, he is treated not as a child, but as another burden on the parish. The workhouse system, which was supposed to provide relief, instead becomes a machine of dehumanization. Oliver's early years in the parish orphanage reveal how social injustice reduces children to little more than statistics. They are underfaved, mistreated, and deprived of the basic affection that every child deserves. The moment Oliver asks for more food is one of the most striking images in literature, because it shows how poverty forces people into desperation, while society responds with punishment rather than compassion. Instead of recognizing his hunger as natural, the authorities view it as rebellion, proving how injustice thrives when the powerful refuse to see the humanity of the poor. As Oliver grows, He is continually confronted with the ways poverty forces people into cycles of crime and exploitation. When he encounters Fagin's gang, we see children like himself, but their innocence has been twisted by the need to survive. They pick pockets, not because they are naturally wicked, but because society has given them no alternative. Dickens carefully illustrates how poverty becomes a breeding ground for criminality. Yet the blame is often placed on the poor themselves instead of the structures that trap them. The injustice lies in the fact that children are condemned for behaviors shaped by the very conditions they were born into. Oliver, who resists becoming part of this system, highlights the unfairness even more clearly because we see how easily innocence can be corrupted when survival demands it. The novel also criticizes the hypocrisy of those who enforce these social systems. Figures of authority, from workhouse officials to parish leaders, act in the name of morality while exploiting the vulnerable. They claim to uphold order and discipline, yet they turn a blind eye to suffering, focusing instead on protecting their own reputations and wealth. Dickens exposes this as one of the deepest forms of social injustice. When those entrusted with power use it to preserve the very inequalities they should be fighting against, Oliver becomes a symbol of how the poor are denied fairness not only in material terms, but also in justice itself. Yet Dickens does not only show cruelty, he contrasts it with the possibility of compassion and reform. Characters such as Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Maylie demonstrate that kindness and empathy can restore dignity to those crushed by poverty. Their treatment of Oliver reminds readers that social injustice is not inevitable, but is the result of human choices. Poverty, Dickens suggests, is not simply a natural state, but something society allows to persist through neglect and cruelty. When compassion is offered, it has the power to lift a person from despair and restore their humanity. At its heart, the depiction of poverty in Oliver Twist serves as a call to awareness. Dickens wanted his readers to confront the hidden realities of Victorian England, where many lived in misery while others turned their eyes away. The novel forces us to see how social injustice operates silently through laws, institutions, and attitudes that treat the poor as less than human. By showing Oliver's suffering, Dickens awakens empathy, urging readers to question their own role in either perpetuating or alleviating inequality. Poverty is not merely a backdrop for Oliver's story, it is the central force that shapes every moment of his life. Testing his innocence and exposing the cruelty of a society that fails its most vulnerable members. The story of Oliver Twist is not simply a tale of survival. It is a journey of self-discovery, where a young boy seeks to understand who he is and where he belongs in a world that constantly tells him he is worthless. From the very beginning, Oliver is denied identity. He is born into a workhouse, his mother dying in obscurity, leaving behind no name, no possessions, no trace of a family legacy. The officials who record his existence assign him the name Twist, at random stripping him of heritage and individuality. This lack of personal history is symbolic of how society erases the poor, treating them as nameless burdens rather than as people with unique stories. For Oliver, The search for identity begins with this void, a longing to find roots and meaning in a life defined by abandonment. His early years are marked by constant rejection. The parish authorities treat him as an object to be managed, not a child to be loved. This rejection raises a deep question of identity. If society considers him less than human, then who is he really? Oliver refuses to accept the image imposed upon him by others. Even in his weakest moments, he carries a sense of dignity, a quiet belief that he is more than what the world says he is. This inner resistance becomes the core of his identity. He may not know where he comes from, but he instinctively knows he is not meant to be a thief, a beggar, or a tool for exploitation. The time Oliver spends with Fagin and his gang further deepens this struggle. Here, the children are defined by crime. Their identities revolve around survival through theft. They find belonging not through love or respect, but through complicity in wrongdoing. Fagin attempts to shape Oliver's identity, to mold him into another extension of his criminal enterprise. Yet, Oliver resists. He is horrified when he realizes what the gang is truly doing, and his refusal to participate shows that his identity is not something others can easily impose upon him. He senses he does not belong there, even though he has nowhere else to turn. This moment highlights a universal truth. The search for identity often involves recognizing what we are not before we fully understand who we are. Oliver's sense of identity begins to take clearer shape when he encounters kindness. Mr. Brownlow becomes a pivotal figure, not only offering him shelter, but also recognizing his innocence and treating him as a human being of worth. For the first time, Oliver experiences belonging built on compassion rather than exploitation. This acceptance allows him to glimpse a version of himself that is not defined by poverty or crime, but by humanity and dignity. His search for identity is not only about discovering his family background, but also about finding spaces where he is seen for who he truly is. Each act of kindness he receives reaffirms his belief that he is more than a victim of circumstance. The eventual revelation of Oliver's parentage is crucial. Yet Dickens makes it clear that blood alone does not define identity. Learning that he comes from a respectable family gives Oliver a rightful place in society. But what truly defines him is the character he has shown throughout his journey. His compassion, honesty, and refusal to be corrupted form the foundation of his identity, stronger than any name or inheritance could provide. The discovery of his lineage restores the external part of his identity, giving him legitimacy in the eyes of society. But his true identity has already been shaped by his resilience in the face of suffering. Oliver's journey reflects the struggle many people face when their worth is denied by the world around them. Identity is not simply inherited. It is forged through choices, experiences, and inner conviction. Dickens shows us that even when institutions strip away names, dignity, and belonging, the search for identity continues because it is a basic human need. Oliver's quest is not just about finding family, it is about finding recognition, love, and a place where he can live as his true self. Through Oliver's story, Dickens suggests that identity cannot be handed down by society or determined by poverty. It is discovered within, and it flourishes when nurtured by compassion. Oliver Twist begins life nameless and unwanted. Yet he emerges as a figure of integrity and humanity, proving that identity is not erased by suffering, but revealed through it. In Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens creates a vivid world where good and evil are constantly in conflict, shaping the destiny of a young boy who becomes the center of this moral struggle. The novel is not only about survival or social injustice, but also about the deeper spiritual and ethical war that plays out in every human society. Dickens does not present good and evil as abstract ideas. He embodies them in his characters, situations, and choices, allowing readers to see how these forces collide and influence lives. Through Oliver's experiences, we witness how innocence and kindness confront corruption and cruelty, and how this battle determines the course of his life. From the earliest chapters, the institutions that should protect children are depicted as corrupt. The parish authorities, supposed to represent order and morality, are instead hypocritical and selfish. Their treatment of Oliver, after he dares to ask for more food, reflects not just neglect, but the triumph of cruelty over compassion. Here, evil is subtle, hidden under the disguise of rules and respectability. Dickens suggests that evil often wears the mask of authority, while good is silenced or ignored. Yet Oliver's simple plea for food represents a spark of goodness, a natural human instinct for survival and fairness that refuses to be crushed by oppressive systems. The most striking representations of evil come through characters like Fagin and Bill Sikes. Fagin embodies cunning corruption, using his intelligence to manipulate children into lives of crime. He preys upon their hunger and vulnerability, reshaping their innocence into tools for theft. His evil is insidious because it thrives on the weakness of others, turning poverty into an opportunity for exploitation. Bill Sikes, on the other hand, represents brutal, physical evil. His violence and lack of remorse show cruelty in its rawest form. Together, they form a world where children like Oliver are trapped, their futures determined by predators who thrive on society's neglect. Against these figures stand the forces of good. Characters like Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Maylie symbolize compassion, mercy, and the possibility of redemption. They do not simply give Oliver food or shelter. They restore his dignity and recognize his humanity. Their kindness contrasts sharply with the exploitation he suffers elsewhere, showing that goodness requires not just feelings but action. Dickens emphasizes that goodness is often quieter than evil. It does not shout or intimidate, but it has the power to heal and transform lives. The presence of these characters reassures us that even in a world filled with cruelty, goodness still exists and can triumph if it persists. Oliver himself becomes the battlefield where this struggle plays out most vividly. He is constantly pulled between two worlds, one of corruption, crime, and violence, and another of kindness, honesty, and care. What makes Oliver unique is that, despite the pressures around him, he refuses to surrender his moral compass. When forced to participate in a burglary, his horror and refusal to embrace the criminal life show that good can survive, even in the darkest environments. His innocence and inner purity are not destroyed by external evil, proving that the human spirit has the strength to resist corruption. The battle between good and evil in Oliver Twist is not confined to individuals, but extends to society as a whole. Dickens shows us that social structures, laws, and institutions can either perpetuate injustice or nurture compassion. Evil is not only in the hands of criminals like Fagin and Sykes, but also in the indifference of respectable citizens who allow poverty and suffering to continue. Conversely, good is not just in acts of charity, but in the recognition of shared humanity and the willingness to protect the vulnerable. The novel becomes a moral map, showing readers the choices that define whether society leans toward cruelty or kindness. This ongoing struggle reveals a truth that Dickens wanted his audience to grasp. The battle of good and evil is not distant or abstract, but immediate and personal. Every act of kindness, every moment of neglect, every choice to exploit or to protect shapes the world around us. Oliver Twist survives not because evil is destroyed entirely, but because goodness persists, often against overwhelming odds. The novel's resolution, with Oliver finding safety and belonging, demonstrates that while evil may dominate much of the story, it does not have the final word. Through Oliver's journey, Dickens illustrates that good and evil are forces woven into the fabric of everyday life, constantly shaping individuals and societies. The resilience of Oliver's innocence against the darkness that surrounds him becomes the ultimate symbol of hope, reminding us that even the smallest acts of goodness can stand against great cruelty. At the heart of Oliver Twist lies a story, not only of suffering and injustice, but of resilience and hope that refuses to be extinguished, even in the bleakest conditions. Charles Dickens presents Oliver as a fragile child exposed to cruelty, neglect, and exploitation. Yet what makes his story powerful is not just the pain he endures, but the strength with which he continues to move forward. Resilience in Oliver is not expressed through physical strength or cleverness, but through his unwavering innocence, his refusal to become hardened or corrupted, and his ability to cling to hope, even when the world gives him no reason to believe in a brighter future. His journey becomes a testament to the endurance of the human spirit and the possibility of light within overwhelming darkness. From the moment of his birth, Oliver's life is marked by tragedy. He enters the world in a workhouse, his mother dying almost immediately, leaving him without family or protection. This beginning could easily have condemned him to despair, yet Oliver survives each trial with a quiet determination. The workhouse authorities subject him to hunger and humiliation, treating him as a burden rather than a child. Yet, even in this environment, he maintains a sense of dignity. When he asks for more food, it is not an act of defiance, but a sign of his instinctive resilience, his unwillingness to silently accept starvation. Hope manifests here in its simplest form: the belief that he deserves more than misery, that life can offer something beyond suffering. As Oliver grows, his journey takes him through environments designed to strip children of hope. Under Fagin's control, surrounded by thieves and tricksters, he is pressured to conform to a life of crime. Many in his position would have surrendered to this path, not out of desire, but necessity, yet Oliver resists. His resilience is seen in his horror at the thought of stealing and his determination to cling to honesty despite the risks. Hope allows him to believe that a life outside corruption is possible, even when all evidence suggests otherwise. Each time Oliver refuses to be shaped by the evil around him, Dickens shows us that resilience is not about avoiding suffering, but about refusing to let suffering define one's soul. Oliver's resilience is further revealed in his capacity to trust and respond to kindness, even after enduring betrayal and abuse. When Mr. Brownlow offers him shelter, Oliver accepts the compassion with gratitude rather than suspicion, demonstrating that his hardships have not destroyed his ability to hope for goodness in others. This ability to keep faith in human kindness is itself an act of resilience. Many would have become bitter or hardened. Yet Oliver continues to believe in the possibility of love and care. Dickens suggests that hope is not only about envisioning a better life, but about remaining open to it when it appears. Oliver's readiness to embrace kindness reflects his inner strength to rise above bitterness. Even when dragged back into the world of crime against his will, Oliver does not lose sight of his hope for something better. When forced into the burglary with Sykes, his terror is real, but so is his refusal to accept the role imposed on him. He becomes a symbol of moral resistance, showing that resilience is not about never falling into hardship, but about never giving up the belief that there is a way out. Each time he is thrown back into despair, he emerges with his innocence intact, proving that hope is a resource that sustains him when nothing else can. The characters who recognize Oliver's purity and offer him protection are drawn to the resilience he embodies. Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Maylie not only see a child in need, but are inspired by the unbroken spirit that survives within him. Their compassion becomes a response to his perseverance, reinforcing the idea that resilience can inspire hope in others as well. Dickens uses this connection to show that resilience and hope are not isolated traits, but forces that ripple outward, creating bonds of trust and compassion that can reshape lives. By the end of the novel, Oliver's resilience is rewarded with a sense of belonging and safety. Yet Dickens makes it clear that his survival is not simply luck or coincidence, but the result of his ability to endure without surrendering his innocence. Hope sustains him until circumstances align in his favor, and resilience keeps him from being destroyed by the cruelty of the world. His journey becomes a reminder that resilience is not about avoiding suffering but about carrying hope through suffering until a better future becomes possible. Through Oliver Twist, Dickens offers a vision of resilience and hope that extends beyond the individual. He invites readers to recognize the power of endurance in the face of injustice and to see hope not as a fragile dream, but as a force that sustains life itself. Oliver, though small and powerless in worldly terms, demonstrates the greatest strength of all, the ability to remain pure, compassionate, and hopeful in a world that tries to erase such qualities. His resilience is not just his survival. It is his refusal to let cruelty define who he is, and his hope is the belief that goodness still exists, waiting to be found. Oliver Twist is more than a work of fiction. It is a mirror held up to society, reflecting its failures, hypocrisies, and responsibilities. Charles Dickens did not merely tell the story of a poor orphan boy. He crafted a narrative designed to awaken the conscience of his readers. Through the struggles of Oliver and the cruel realities he endures, Dickens delivers moral lessons that remain relevant beyond Victorian England. He challenges society to see the human cost of neglect, to recognize the dangers of indifference, and to embrace compassion as a duty rather than a choice. The novel becomes a moral guide, reminding us that how a community treats its most vulnerable members is the truest measure of its character. One of the most powerful lessons Dickens communicates is the responsibility society holds toward children. Oliver is born innocent, yet from his first breath, he is subjected to cruelty not of his own making, but of the system that surrounds him. The workhouse, an institution meant to provide relief, strips him of dignity and care, treating him as a burden rather than a child. Dickens forces us to ask whether a society that allows children to starve and suffer can ever call itself just. The lesson here is clear: children, as the most defenseless, require protection and nurturing, and failing to provide, that is not just a failure of charity, but a failure of morality itself. Another lesson lies in Dickens's exposure of hypocrisy. The authorities who run the workhouses claim to act in the name of morality, discipline, and social order, yet their actions reveal greed, selfishness, and a lack of compassion. They use rules and respectability to justify cruelty, punishing Oliver for daring to ask for more food. Dickens shows that true morality cannot exist in words or appearances. It must be reflected in actions that honor human dignity. The moral lesson for society is that hypocrisy is one of the greatest dangers to justice, for it allows cruelty to flourish under the disguise of virtue. The novel also teaches that poverty is not a personal failure, but a social condition shaped by inequality and neglect. The children in Fagin's gang are not born criminals. They are made vulnerable by hunger and abandonment. Society, by ignoring their needs, drives them into lives of crime, and then condemns them for it. Dickens insists that social injustice creates cycles of suffering, and only by addressing the root causes of poverty can society hope to break these chains. The moral lesson here is a call for responsibility. It is not enough to punish crime without addressing the desperation that fuels it. Compassion emerges as one of the most essential moral values Dickens promotes. In the figures of Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Maylie, we see how kindness has the power to heal wounds inflicted by cruelty. Their willingness to see Oliver not as a criminal or burden, but as a child in need transforms his life. Dickens presents compassion not as a luxury, but as a moral obligation. The lesson is that society must move beyond judgment and indifference to embrace empathy as a guiding principle. Without compassion, institutions become cold and destructive. But with it, individuals and communities can restore dignity and create change. Another moral lesson is the resilience of goodness in the face of evil. Oliver's refusal to become corrupted by his environment illustrates that innocence and morality, though fragile, can survive even in the harshest conditions. Dickens uses this to remind society that the potential for goodness exists in every child, but it is society's duty to protect and nurture it. Allowing evil to dominate, whether through neglect, exploitation, or violence, means wasting the possibility of human goodness that could enrich the world. The responsibility, then, is collective to create conditions where innocence can flourish rather than be destroyed. The novel ultimately delivers a lesson about the interconnectedness of society. The suffering of the poor is not isolated. It reflects the moral health of the entire community. When children like Oliver are abandoned, when criminals like Fagin exploit the desperate, and when authorities abuse power, it reveals that society as a whole is complicit in injustice. Dickens teaches that social reform is not just a political issue, but a moral imperative. Every individual has a role to play in creating a world where compassion outweighs cruelty and justice is more than an idea. Oliver Twist remains timeless because these moral lessons extend far beyond the Victorian age. They ask us to confront uncomfortable truths about inequality, to question the integrity of our institutions, and to recognize the humanity of those who are marginalized. Dickens's message is that a society's greatness is measured not by wealth or power, but by its treatment of the weak, the poor, and the voiceless. Through Oliver's story, he invites us to imagine a more compassionate world, one where moral responsibility guides action and where justice is not selective, but universal. When we look at the life of Oliver Twist, we are not just reading about one child's struggles, but about the reflection of a society tested by its own conscience. Oliver teaches us that innocence can endure cruelty, that poverty exposes injustice, that identity is a quest for dignity, that good and evil are always in conflict, that resilience and hope can outlast despair, and that moral lessons for society are not suggestions but responsibilities. Dickens did not write this story to entertain alone. He wrote it to awaken hearts, to remind us that every Oliver who suffers in silence is a measure of our humanity. The message is simple yet profound. When we choose compassion over indifference, when we protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them, when we recognize dignity where the world sees only weakness, we not only change a life, we transform society itself. Oliver's survival is proof that goodness, though tested, never disappears. It waits for us to nurture it, defend it, and carry it forward as a light against the darkness of injustice.